Remote work gives you freedom, right? Well, that is until you get fired. And then the big question hits. Do your legal rights come from the state where you live or the one where your company is based? That one detail can change everything. And that's exactly what happened to Jan Kuklenski in the case we're talking about today. So if you work remotely or if you hire people who do, this case is a serious wake up call. By the end of this video, you'll understand how courts decide which state law applies, what remote workers should be watching out for, and how one woman's case was dismissed simply because of where she worked. Hi, I'm Harlow Reed, employment lawyer, HR consultant, and creator of the HR Insider. And on this channel, I do more than give my legal opinion. I talk about real legal cases to show how the law might apply to your situation. Okay, so there's a lot of excitement and interest around remote work these days, and for good reason. Remote work really does have its perks. It gives you flexibility, no long commute, better work life balance, and in many cases, it can even boost productivity. You can live where you want, structure your day in a way that works for you, and just avoid a lot of the stress that comes with being in the office, clinic, classroom, or wherever you work full time. But one thing people don't always think about is what it actually means for their legal rights. And that's where things can get complicated. The case we're covering today has a few twists and turns, and I left them in on purpose because these are real people, not just headlines with concepts. And real cases aren't always clean cut. It's not as simple as, oh, she got fired, so she sued, or she asked for something, she didn't get it, so she quit. Real life is messy, and the facts matter. The truth is, these cases show just how complex it can be for an employee to pursue legal action, and also how easily an employer can fall short. Okay, let's talk about it. The content on this channel is for informational purposes only and shouldn't be taken as legal advice. Always consult a qualified attorney or HR professional for guidance on your specific situation. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe. This story begins with Jan Kuklinski, who was a long-time Medtronic employee. Jan began her employment in 1999 as a cardiovascular account manager, but she went on to hold other positions as well at Medtronic, including a business development manager for cardiovascular accounts, before eventually becoming director of corporate strategic alliances in December 2018. In this position, Jan served as a partnership lead in Medtronic's value based healthcare team. Now, Medtronic is a global powerhouse in medical technology. They design and manufacture devices and therapies that help treat more than 70 chronic conditions like heart disease, diabetes, neurological disorders, and spinal issues. The company was founded in 1949 in Minneapolis, and today it's one of the largest medical device companies in the world with more than 95,000 employees across 150 countries. Now, legally, Medtronic headquarters is in Dublin, Ireland, but make no mistake, their core operations are still based in Minnesota, and that's where the business runs. In 2024, Medtronic brought in over $31 billion in revenue. So we're talking about a serious giant here in the healthcare space. Now, Jan Kuklinski never actually lived in Minnesota at any point during her work for Medtronic. She lived in Chicago starting in 2008 and later relocated to Michigan, all while continuing to work remotely for Medtronic. Now, Jan traveled to Minneapolis early in her career for trainings, customer events, and work related projects, but the COVID-19 pandemic, oh, we all remember that, it prompted Medtronic to order all of its employees to work remotely in early 2020. And as a result, Jan Kuklinski did not travel to Minnesota for work at any time after February 2020. From day one, Jan worked remotely from her home, never at a Medtronic office. Her entire career with the company was spent working off site. So here's what happened. Around 2020, late 2020, Medtronic got new leadership. And like we often see in corporations with leadership changes, a major restructure followed. And that restructure took place through the end of 2020 and into early 2021. And one of the big shifts for the organization was to move away from value based healthcare. Leadership decided that value based healthcare just wasn't a priority anymore. So they took steps to shut down or minimize that part of the business. And that's important because remember, Jan Kuklinski's role was part of that team. She stayed on the value based healthcare team throughout the restructuring. She wasn't moved or reassigned or given a new role, and she remained right where she was. But some other members of the value based healthcare team left Medtronic, including Jan Kuklinski's supervisor. So in January 2021, Jan Kuklinski met with Linda Ingalls, who was the Medtronic vice president. She wanted to discuss her role at Medtronic moving forward. And based on her conversation with Linda Ingalls, Jan Kuklinski decided to stay with Medtronic and manage the four value based healthcare partnerships that she had while working within Medtronic's enterprise account group. Initially, Jan thought she'd continue reporting to Linda Ingalls, who had been her interim supervisor, but instead she found herself reporting to someone named Joe Hensley, who was a senior managing director at Medtronic. According to Jan, no one gave her a heads up about this change. She just realized it at some point, and she wasn't thrilled about it. She felt like the work Joe's team didn't align with what she was doing. It just didn't make sense to her. And over time, Jan's position started shifting. The responsibilities weren't just about value based healthcare anymore. Medtronic wanted her to take on more commercial duties to things like managing contracts, overseeing account performance, and navigating supply chain issues. And Jan, she was hesitant and she demonstrated open reluctance to take on the full scope of the commercial aspects of her new role. But in May 2021, Linda Ingalls, remember her? She was the vice president that Jan initially reached out to with concerns about her job. Well, Linda Ingalls made it clear change was coming, and she sent Jan an email confirming that fiscal year 2022 would be a transition year, that by 2023, Jan was expected to take on the full enterprise accounts role, including contracting responsibilities. Basically, this is the direction we're going, and you'll be expected to grow into it. And then there was a change to Jan's pay structure. She had been compensated under a Medtronic incentive plan that didn't include sales commissions. But in May 2021, she learned that she'd be switching to a commission based model. And so Jan's salary would now depend, at least in part, on the revenue her account generated. That raised several red flags for Jan. And it raised a red flag for Jan because value based healthcare partnerships weren't supposed to be tied to sales performance. She believed the new compensation model violated Medtronic's agreements with its partners. And so Jan raised her concerns with Joe Hensley, her new supervisor. She contacted the compliance team and she also reached out to the senior vice president named Dave Robert. And she sent a detailed letter to Linda Ingalls also, outlining why the new model was a problem. And in that letter, Jan explained that the partnerships were built on trust and weren't meant to be treated like commercial contracts. Medtronic's compliance department responded a few days later saying that they were reviewing the issue and working to clarify her job duties to avoid any legal risk. But ultimately, the company flat out dismissed Jan's concerns and moved forward with its commission based structure. Medtronic just wasn't backing away from its commission model. Then came a health issue. Jan had an inner ear condition called cholesteatoma, which requires surgery from time to time on her ear. And on June 7th, 2021, Jan had a major operation, her third one, and took medical leave starting that day. What began as a short leave was extended multiple times and ultimately lasted through early September. And while Jan was out on medical leave, Medtronic reassigned her accounts, including the biggest one, which was Spectrum, to another employee. And when Jan requested an additional 3-month extension of leave into December, Medtronic scheduled an interactive process meeting with her. And during that meeting, they told Jan that they couldn't hold her position open any longer. They followed up with a letter that same day and said if her position was still open when she came back, great, she could go right into it. But if it wasn't open, she could apply elsewhere in the company. And shortly after that meeting, Medtronic posted her job, and in October of 2021, they filled it internally with another employee. On October 6th, they notified Jan that the role had been officially filled. Then on December 8th, 2021, Jan logged in remotely, maybe expecting to begin her transition back to work. And instead, Medtronic terminated her that same day. No position, no return, just done. And on November 20th, 2023, Jan Kuklenski filed a lawsuit in the District of Minnesota claiming Medtronic wrongfully terminated her. She brought multiple claims against the company, including disability discrimination under the Minnesota Human Rights Act, retaliation under the Minnesota Whistleblower Act, and a few others that were dismissed early on, like a claim under the Family Medical Leave Act. But her case hit a major roadblock. The district court ruled that she didn't meet the MHRA's definition of an employee because she hadn't physically worked in Minnesota for nearly 2 years before she was fired. Now, Jan appealed that case and it went up to the Eighth Circuit, but the appellate court agreed with the lower court. They held that even though Medtronic is based in Minnesota, that alone wasn't enough to give Jan protection under Minnesota law. And the reason given by the court was that Jan worked entirely outside the state of Minnesota for nearly 2 years before her termination. The court said that MHRA didn't apply to her situation, so her remote work status ended up putting her outside the reach of the very law she was relying on. So, what does this all mean if you're an employee working remotely? It means that where you live and where you work can seriously affect the legal protections that you have. Just because your employer is based in a certain state, that doesn't automatically mean you can use that state's laws to protect yourself, especially if you've been working remotely in another state for a long time. In Jan's case, she hadn't physically worked in Minnesota for nearly 2 years, so the court said she wasn't covered by Minnesota's Human Rights Act. That's a big deal because it meant she couldn't move forward with her discrimination and retaliation claims under that law. Now, if you're an employer or a small business owner, here's what this means for you. When you hire someone who lives in another state, you're not just managing a remote employee, you're stepping into a whole new legal landscape. Different states have different rules, and once someone starts working remotely from another state, their rights and your responsibilities might be governed by that state's laws, not yours. This can impact everything from discrimination protections to wage and hour laws to terminations, how those are handled. So, if you're building a remote team, don't assume your state's laws will apply. And if there's a dispute, the court will likely focus on the employee's location, not yours. There's some real workplace irony in this case. Here you have Jan, a long term employee working for a healthcare company, and yet when she faced serious health challenges, her job was ultimately cut. She'd been with Medtronic for over 2 decades, but like so many corporate shifts, things started to change. New leadership, new responsibilities, new reporting structure, and not a lot of clarity up front. Now, to be fair, it looks like Medtronic did try to give her some time to adjust, but let's be honest, not everyone thrives in that kind of uncertain, constantly shifting environment. And Jan was dealing with more than just workplace change. She was facing real health issues. That's something employers often overlook. People are dealing with things that you can't always see. So, when you combine medical challenges with rapidly evolving job demands, it's easy to see how someone could feel overwhelmed. From the outside, it seems like Jan just couldn't or maybe didn't want to fall in line with the new direction. And in the end, it feels like she was pushed out. Sometimes these situations come down to simple questions. How much training did employees get? How much time were they given to adapt? Were they truly supported through the transition? I don't know that I entirely agree with what the court ruled here in Jan's case, but the decision does highlight how tricky these remote work and jurisdictional issues can be. Thanks for watching today. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real world workplace cases and lessons that matter. I'll see you in the next video.